I'm Sruti.
I'm Hanno.
And welcome to Red-Handed.
And 2025.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year.
This is the start of another very exciting year at Red-Handed. Who knows what's going to happen?
No.
Every time I open my emails, there's something new in there.
No, you just defeat your enemies. Do no harm, take no shit.
That's the motto. And we've got a hell of a case to get started here at Red-Handed, so let's just get into it. In 2011, a young woman was found dead in her home, having been stabbed at least 20 times in the head, scalp, neck, stomach, and chest. Authorities ruled it a suicide. And today, 14 years later, her family are still fighting for justice. This locked room mystery, with its creeping corruption, unbelievably bad police work, and, I have to say, the worst 911 call that I have ever heard, is one of the strangest cases we've ever come across. It's been on my list for quite some time, but after a little update in December 2024...
Just a little one.
We figured it was time to finally wrap our heads around this incredibly bizarre story. So strap in and prepare yourselves, because we have a hell of a two-parter to kick off Red-Handed 2025.
Ellie Greenberg was a 27-year-old first-grade teacher. She worked at the Juanita Park Academy in Philadelphia and lived with her partner of 3 years, Sam Goldberg, who worked for NBC Sports on the golf production team. How fucking boring. Sam and Ellie lived in the Venice Lofts apartment complex in the Manayunk neighbourhood, a trendy, artsy part of the city full of young professionals and bougie cafes. The pair were engaged, and in January 2011, which is where our story starts, they had just sent out their save the date cards, and they were planning on getting married in the August of the following year.
On the 26th of January, Ellie left school early. There was a big snowstorm coming, and so the kids had all been sent home. On her way back to the apartment, she stopped by a petrol station and filled up her car. When she got home, she got down to some wedding planning and texted with her mum. That afternoon, at around 4:45 p.m, Sam left the couple's flat and headed down to the gym, which was on the ground floor of their building. He returned about 35 minutes later, at just after 5:15 p.m. But he couldn't get into the apartment. The door was locked from the inside.
According to Sam, he repeatedly knocked on the door, shouted for Ellie, tried phoning her mobile, texting her, and emailing her too. But there was no reply. And he was starting to get annoyed, which is very evident through the series of texts that he sent his fiancée between 5:32 and 5:54 p.m, which go like this. Hello, open the door, what are you doing? I'm getting pissed, hello? You better have an excuse, what the fuck? You have no idea.
Now, these texts garner a lot of speculation on the internet, a lot of scrutiny, and a lot of people being like, they're so abusive. I would say, at this point, those text messages, I could see myself sending those. I could be like, I told you I was going down to the gym. I come back and the door's locked from the inside. I'd be annoyed as well. I'd maybe go from being annoyed to worried after getting no reply for all that time. But yeah, annoyed would be a feeling that I'd be feeling.
So, with no other way of getting in, and with Ellie seemingly ignoring him, Sam went downstairs, found the security guard and concierge of their building, who's a man called Philip Hanton. Sam asked Philip if he would be able to help him get into his apartment because he was locked out, and Philip said that he was sorry. He couldn't, he wasn't allowed. So, Sam asked if it would be okay if he broke the door down himself. Philip advised him not to, saying that Sam would be charged for any damage he did. But after having been locked out for nearly an hour now, Sam figured that it was worth it. So he went back up to his 6th floor apartment and broke the door down.
Once inside, Sam saw Ellie on the floor of the kitchen. She was splayed out, with her head and shoulders propped up against the bottom cabinets, where the cabinets met at a corner between the sink and the hob. Her legs were spread in front of her in a V shape. There was blood on the floor, and Ellie wasn't moving. At 6:30 p.m., Sam Goldberg called 911.
2 EMT firefighters were the first to respond. They were soon followed by uniformed police, detectives and an investigator from the medical examiner's office. Ellie was pronounced dead on the scene. Sam told them what had happened, that he'd been at the gym and when he returned the door was locked from the inside and Ellie was dead.
Sam was taken in for questioning, but to this day we have never seen a transcript of that interview. Because Philadelphia has an interesting quirk to its state law. As standard, police case files are never, ever made public, even if the case is closed or once it's been adjudicated. Essentially, it's the total polar opposite of the Florida sunshine law. So, it's certainly not always sunny in Philadelphia.
Very nice.
Thank you.
I think I'm kind of fine with that, though. Obviously, as a true crime podcast, it does make our lives a lot easier if you can read them. But I think in general, I'm okay.
Yeah, it's tricky because a case like this is the perfect example of like the problems that poses, because it's like when anything is done in the dark or with secrecy or the public feel like there's a lack of transparency, you're just going to get accused of all sorts of conspiracies and cover-ups and ill goings on. And, could totally see why with this case. But obviously also the flip side is the Florida sunshine law. Everything is happening out in the sunshine and it leads to the public perhaps having too much information. It's a fine balance, I think. But definitely this whole quirk of Philadelphia law, the fact that we have never been able to and most likely will never be able to see the police files behind the death, has definitely made this story even more shrouded in mystery than I first thought it would be. But to be honest, the secretive case files are truly just the tip of the grubby iceberg with this situation. Because as we told you at the start, the police decided on the scene that night that this was a suicide. And despite all the evidence to the contrary that has come out over the past 14 years, the Philadelphia Police Department have stuck firmly to that conclusion. And they have fought Ellie's parents every step of the way.
Having said that, there are people out there who think that this conclusion drawn by the police was correct and still is, and that Ellie really did take her own life that day. And they think that for the following reasons. The apartment door was locked from the inside. There was no one else in the flat. They lived on the 6th floor, and the snow on the balcony hadn't been disturbed, so nobody had got in and out that way. And all of those things do make suicide look like the only possible scenario. A scenario only made more likely when you couple the locked door with the fact that Ellie had been having a tough time in the lead up to her death. She was struggling with anxiety and had been trying a variety of different medications in an attempt to ease her symptoms, some of which, a great injustice, suicidal ideation is a side effect, more than you would think. Ellie had also texted her parents a few weeks before she died saying that she wanted to come home to Harrisburg because she was struggling at work. Her parents suspected that Ellie wasn't telling them the whole truth, so they said that she absolutely could come home whenever she wanted, but perhaps she should try and speak to a therapist before she made any big decisions like quitting her job and moving home.
And yes, also, suicides involving self-stabbing are incredibly rare. Apparently, they only constitute for about 2% of suicides in the US, and nearly all of those deaths involve men. When women take their own lives, they tend not to go out with such violent methods. And when on the rare occasion they do stab themselves, there's usually only a single stab wound, bar perhaps the hesitation marks that you'd expect.
Are we including wrist slitting as stabbing?
No, so they're specifically talking about like self-stabbing rather than cutting. And also, when people tend to kill themselves through self-stabbing, they almost always lift up their clothes and stab themselves directly through the skin rather than through their clothes. But the wounds to Ellie's stomach and chest had all been inflicted through 2 tops and a zip-up sweatshirt. But, to quote Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, when you have eliminated all which is impossible, then whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
I am amazed it has taken us nearly 10 years to put that one in there.
How? Well, there you go. It's about time. So yeah, with that said, it has to be suicide, right? The police must truly have eliminated all other possibilities. So even though the likelihood of it being suicide seems so remote, it has to be that, right? They have to have eliminated anything else, like, I don't know, murder? Not even fucking close. And over the next 2 weeks, we are going to be getting into all of the ways in which they weren't even close. But just to set the scene as to how much they didn't look into this properly, the investigator from the medical examiner's office who was there that night missed all 10 of the stab wounds to Ellie's back, the back of her neck, and the back of her head all together. Because like we told you at the start, Ellie Greenberg had 20 stab wounds to her body, at least. They only counted 10 that night because they didn't even look at her back. So you would have to forgive me for thinking that they didn't exactly do the most thorough job that night.
First responders on the scene, the EMT firefighters, were sure that what they were looking at was a homicide. They even told Philip Hanton, who's the building's security guard / concierge, on their way out, "You've got a murder up there." And after the EMT firefighters left, they went to the police station thinking that homicide would want to interview them.
You know, being the first people on the scene.
But no one would ever interview them. It does kind of seem like the police wanted to brush this entire case under the carpet quite quickly. And that may have had something to do with who was waiting downstairs at the Venice Lofts apartment complex. Sam Goldberg, as it turned out, is a well-connected man from an influential family. And when he apparently came back to the apartment at 5:26 p.m. after his woeful 35-minute gym session, and after he spent 45 minutes being locked outside his flat, and before he decided to break down the door, Sam Goldberg phoned his cousin, Kamian, like Damien but with a K, Schwartzman. And he called him at about 6:14 p.m. Is Damien with a K a locksmith? Or maybe does he have a party trick where he can open a locked door over the phone? No, he does not. But Kamian Schwartzman does happen to be a lawyer.
Kamian and Sam spoke on the phone for about 5 minutes. Then Sam hung up. And at 6:26 p.m, so about 5 minutes after the chat with cousin Kamian ended, Sam received a call from his uncle, Kamian's dad, James Schwartzman. Uncle Jimmy, as he's known, is also a lawyer. It would be 5 minutes after this call, at 6:31 p.m, that Sam Goldberg, now having broken down the door and found Ellie, called 911.
Uncle Jimmy is a huge part of this story, and also a huge part of the potential corruption kicking around this case. He's been described as politically important in the city of Philadelphia because Uncle Jimmy is a former prosecutor. And at the time, 2011, he was the vice chairman of the board of directors of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority. And he is now, at the time we are recording this, the president judge of the Pennsylvania Court of Judicial Discipline. So he's essentially a judge of judges. He oversees the ethics of other lawyers in Pennsylvania. He is definitely not an unimportant man.
But there are people out there who are involved in this case, who say that, yeah, absolutely, Uncle Jimmy is this big hotshot lawman, but he doesn't have that level of crazy sway with the police to the point that they wouldn't investigate a murder because of him.
Bollocks.
And look, I don't know. Hear me out if we go with the people that believe that. Like I said, I absolutely do think that Uncle Jimmy is a fucking corrupt bastard. And I'm also not saying he's not involved in many ways for how this case unfolded. But I suspect that Uncle Jimmy, rather than outright telling the police, you aren't going to investigate my nephew for murder or I'll fucking have you, I think possibly it was that he and Kamian were able to exploit the police's stupidity and help Sam successfully navigate this entire situation with their confident know-how of the law. Like, they get him the best attorney straight away. They tell him what to say. I think they also bulldoze the police in many ways. I suspect what really happened here, and look, I may well be wrong, and we're going to get into everything else next week around the potential outright corruption. But I suspect what really happened here is that the police fucked up beyond belief on that night, treated this as a suicide because they were too quick to take the word of this influential family, and then they went on to spend the next decade and a half covering it up. And as for the medical examiner's office, we'll get into them in detail next week for the role that they played. I will also say, I could not really find the name of the lead detective on this case. All I know is there were 13 police officers who came and went from that scene that night. I suspect if there is a role to be played between Uncle Jimmy and the police and him having outright influence on them, it's got to be the lead detective. And him having told that person, no. But I can't find any evidence for outright conversations. But again, so much of this case is shrouded in mystery. We have to just pick apart what we do know.
And we'll also see over this week and the next. This case was kicked from department to department within law enforcement. And so many people, so obviously, wanted to mask and cover up the shit show of what happened. But when people like the assistant DA, Guy DeAndrea, wanted to investigate this case again in 2015, his boss didn't stop him from doing so. And DA Guy found Ellie's case file literally gathering dust in a cupboard under some Christmas decorations, and he was shocked when he read it. He asked if he could look into it, and his boss gave him the green light, which, if there was power being exerted from Uncle Jimmy or anyone else, does seem a bit unlikely that he would have been allowed to go ahead. Ellie's death had already been ruled a suicide. Guy's boss could easily have told him not to waste his time or resources on this. But she didn't. And Guy pursued the case, but realised that there was a total dearth of evidence because of how the police had failed to investigate properly right at the start.
Now, for those of you convinced that there is definitely more outright corruption involved and it's not just arse covering, I honestly don't blame you. And don't worry, we will definitely talk about the then AG, now Governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, and his involvement in this case next week. So don't think I'm writing off the corruption. I just think a lot of it has to do with how the police fucked up beyond belief that first night and what transpired after.
But for now, we're going to stick with the night of Ellen's death and the days that followed straight after. And we're going to do that because it's so crucial to understanding what happened and why we are still here where we are with this case today.
Following his call with Sam, Camion arrived at the apartment complex before the EMTs even got there. And I think this is such an important point because remember, Sam called his cousin Camion first and they spoke from 6:14 to 6:19 p.m. Then Sam spoke to Uncle Jimmy. For Camion to have reached the apartment complex from where he lived by 6:34 p.m., so that's before the EMTs, he would have had to have left as soon as his call with Sam ended. But according to the lawyer representing Camion and Jimmy, apparently both of the men were still on the phone to Sam when he broke down the door and found Ellie, and they heard him, apparently, lose it when he saw Ellie on the floor. But if that's the case, it makes even less sense. This whole timeline makes even less sense. Because Sam calls Camion, they talk, hang up, Uncle Jimmy calls 5 minutes later, presumably after having spoken to his son Camion. And then Camion, who must have left his house by now, so as soon as that call with Sam ended, to head to the apartment because he gets there before the EMTs, why was he added into this conference call with Uncle Jimmy and Sam? Why would you need to do that? Because all this second call would have been before Sam allegedly knew that there was a bigger problem than him just being locked out of his flat. Why were they all on a group call trying to solve that problem? And I'm sorry, but I don't care how close you are. Who goes out in a snowstorm to help their cousin just get back into their locked apartment?
Me. I would do that for basically anybody.
But I'm like, okay, so fine. We're like, Camion is a great guy. He's like, I'm coming for you, Sam. I'm going to come help you get into that door. My problem still stands. He would have had to have left as soon as that call ended in order to get there before the EMTs in that shorter space of time. So we're saying that Sam calls Camion. They speak 5 minutes, hang up. Camion must have called Uncle Jimmy. We don't know because we don't have the phone records. Then Uncle Jimmy calls Sam. They're both speaking. Camion must have left. But then he's added into this conference call. So the three of them are talking about how Sam is locked out of his apartment. And then while he's on the phone to them, he breaks down the door, quote unquote, finds Ellie, quote unquote, has a panic attack, which is what the two men say they heard. Why is Camion on the phone with him? Because all they know before the door is broken down is that Sam's locked out of his fucking apartment. Why do 3 men? How many men does it take to open a fucking locked door? Why is that the conversation that's happening? That's the thing I struggle with. The only thing I can think to that is why are all these people on this conference call is because they had already been told what was behind that locked door.
No, I take your point. It does seem quite a lot. And because he's not out on the street, he's in the building.
He's in the building.
Yeah. No, I think I would. I would. If I was locked out of my building in a snowstorm, would you not come and help me?
I would come and help you. I guess my point is, why would we need a 3-way phone call with me, you, and your uncle?
No, I agree.
That's my question. What are we talking about that's that important?
Yeah.
Why does Uncle Jimmy need to be involved? Because fine, Sam's spoken to Camion. He's like, yeah, bro, I got you. I'm coming. I'm on my way. Love you. Going out in the snow. Why is he calling Uncle Jimmy, his dad, to give Sam a call? Does he need like a 3-way hand-holding session until Camion gets there? For what? He's just locked out of his house. He's been locked out for 45 minutes. He's already spoken to Philip Hanton. Like, I don't get why they're saying there's this 3-way call.
And this phone call story is contradicted by evidence as well. Sam told the police that he forced his apartment door open at 6:29 p.m, but the phone records, and more crucially, the CCTV from the hallway in the apartment building, shows that Sam was not on the phone with the Schwartzmans or anybody else at that particular time. But despite this, the Schwartzmans' lawyer says that they still stick by the story. They are lying, it's obvious, but why are they doing that? We're going to tell you next week. This is the first of 2 attempts that Sam's family make to try and provide an eye, or in this case, ear witness to Sam, quote-unquote, discovering Ellie.
Yeah. Why else would they lie? Why else would they lie? And if they are lying about something that's so easily refutable, why is it so important that Sam Goldberg needed an ear witness to finding Ellie? But sticking with the timeline of that night, Camion, as we said, arrived just after 6:30. And he's followed soon after by his dad, Uncle Jimmy, and Sam's parents. They were all held downstairs while the police examined the scene and questioned Sam. But Uncle Jimmy kept asking to be allowed up to the flat, to which he was told that his nephew didn't need an attorney yet. Even the fact that Sam Goldberg, after Ellie is found, was taken to the Northwest Detectives Unit to be questioned, rather than to homicide, even though he was taken in by homicide, is baffling.
And it does feel like Sam's uncle was there pressing for this to happen, to avoid the optics of Sam being questioned in the homicide unit. And again, this is what we mean about Uncle Jimmy using his power and influence to steer the investigation from the off. We can't prove that the police were like, yeah, let's cover this up because it's him, or because they were stupid and by the time they realised what they'd done, they thought it was too late and they were in too deep. We will see.
So meanwhile, Ellie's body was taken to the medical examiner's office. And while her parents, Joshua and Sandra Greenberg, were notified, sadly, they were stuck because of the snow and couldn't get to her. The next morning, on the 27th of January 2011 at 9 a.m, Dr. Marlon Osborne carried out an autopsy on Ellie. And he ruled the cause of death to be multiple stab wounds, at least 20 to be precise. And the reason they can't be exactly sure is like the likelihood of multiple stab wounds having landed in exactly the same place and it not being super clear. Now, this was a shock to the police because, as we said, the investigator from the scene had completely missed 10 of the stab wounds to Ellie's back, the back of her neck and her scalp. But things just went from bad to worse for the Philadelphia Police Department, because Dr. Osborne noted in his preliminary report that the manner of death was homicide. Joshua Greenberg, Ellie's dad, was about to eulogize his daughter at a Harrisburg synagogue when he got the news that her death had been ruled a homicide, not a suicide. And as horrific as the news was, Mr. Greenberg said he was happy. It was bittersweet to know that Ellie hadn't killed herself. But you know who wasn't happy? The police. Because they now realised that they were in major shit.
And that's because they had, as we've discussed as per our previous email, bizarrely and prematurely decided on the night before that Ellie's death was a suicide. And they had also left the scene totally unsecured. There was no crime scene tape, no officers, nothing. They'd barely taken any photos even. They hadn't dusted for prints, and they hadn't used luminol. The area wasn't searched properly at all, and no neighbours were questioned.
It is just so bad when you read it out like that.
The crime scene team, as a matter of fact, were not even called out that night. So, because no luminol or anything like that had been used, we really don't know where else in the apartment blood was, or if there had been attempts to clean it up. In the time it took for Dr. Osborne's report to come out, the Philadelphia police had also allowed the building manager, a lady called Melissa Ware, into the apartment where Ellie had died, and she was allowed to videotape the entire room, which we can only assume was an attempt to protect her company against any questions about damage and condition with regarding to the flat. And this video does become important later on, although it may seem boring and administrative at this point, so just put it in your brain holes. One of them, you can pick one, I'm not going to tell you.
That same day, so on the 27th of January, so the day after Ellie died, Melissa Ware had also received a call from none other than Uncle Jimmy. He asked her if it would be okay for him to pop by the apartment and pick up a suit for his nephew Sam to wear to Ellie's funeral. Now, obviously it might sound like quite a soon funeral for a lot of people, but it is my understanding that in the Jewish faith, you do it like ASAP, immediately. Now, Melissa, on hearing this, did the right thing and checked with the police. And they told her to go nuts. Sam's father even kindly offered to pay for a cleaning crew to take care of the apartment. The day after his future daughter-in-law died in there. Why is that your primary concern? It's not a flat they own. It's a rental flat. Why are you so bothered already offering up to pay for a crime scene cleanup? But again, the police didn't ask the questions we're asking. They just gave a big old thumbs up. The police even recommended a special, specific crime scene cleanup company who came by and got to work that same day.
I agree that he's being nefarious. However, if I were to play devil's advocate, which
please.
I hate saying because I am not representing the devil in a court of law, when people die, especially if it is sudden, it is quite common for people to be like, okay, well, what do I do? What do I do next? We need to arrange a funeral. We need to get a rabbi. We need to do all of this. And maybe we need to clean it up. It is quite a human... I don't think that's why Jimmy's doing it. But it is quite a human reaction to be like, okay, well, fuck. Here we are.
Yeah.
What do we do next? We can't just sit here.
Sure.
So I can see that. But as I said, I don't think that's why he's doing it.
And again, there are people who absolutely think that Ellie killed herself. And I'm glad that you are here being the quote-unquote devil's advocate, as much as you don't want to say that term. Like, for me, with cases like this, and any case we cover, it comes down to the totality of evidence, right? It's like any of these things in isolation, you could be like, well, that doesn't prove anything. Add it all up, and pretty soon, you're looking at a big fat brick wall in front of you, through which I cannot wiggle my way through.
No, and this is a particular unwiggler. As promised, Uncle Jimmy dropped by the apartment the day after Ellie died, and he took Sam's suit away with him. And also, he took Ellie's phone, her personal laptop, her work laptop, her handbag, her wallet, her credit cards, and Sam's laptop as well. The suit I can kind of understand. Why are you taking all of those things?
Good question. Now, Uncle Jimmy claims that it was to keep all these things safe. But then, a big question I have about that is, why didn't you then take Ellie's engagement ring? It's a very expensive, very big ring. And it was actually a family heirloom on the Goldberg side. Why are you leaving that there if you are taking all of these other things to keep them safe from the cleaning crew? Because that ring was just left on the bedside table of the couple's room. Also, if Jimmy really did take these things to protect them, because he really believed that Ellie had killed herself, why didn't he give her belongings to her grieving family at the funeral? But he didn't. He kept them all.
As you can see, the crime scene was totally fucked. Any evidence that may have been there was long gone by now. The place had been cleaned and sanitised by a crime scene crew, and key items like Ellie's phone and her laptops were totally compromised, having fallen out of the chain of custody and into the hands of a person with a potentially enormous motive to tamper with them. And we will tell you what was on Ellie's laptop later on. But we also have to remember that all of this, the cleanup and the pickups, happened within a day of Ellie dying. And now the police were being told by the medical examiner that her death was going to be ruled as a homicide and not a suicide as they first suspected. And that meant that the Philadelphia Police Department were fucked.
So let's have a quick chat about whose authority it is to rule with regards to manner of death in cases like this. Well, the police arrive at the scene, they collect evidence, the body goes to the medical examiner's office, and the coroner will consider the state of the body itself, so injuries, etc., and cause of death, but they will also consider, for the manner of death, the circumstances surrounding the death. So was the door latched from the inside, for example? And it is the medical examiner who ultimately rules on cause of death, the literal reason that the person died, so stab wounds or whatever. But it is also them who rules on the manner of death. And it will either be suicide, misadventure, undetermined, or homicide. And then the police work with that to then close the case or build the case. Here, the police had already closed the case before the ME had given his verdict. Very bad news bears.
So for now, let's follow the investigation. There's double air quotes. In the biggest air quotes imaginable. On the 28th of January 2011, the police got a search warrant and they went back to the flat, but of course we already know it had been professionally cleaned and sanitised by that point. And it's now that the police learn where all of Ellie's stuff had been taken. And the police only got Ellie's laptops and her phone back into their possession on the 29th of January, so that means that Uncle Jimmy had them for a whole 2 days. This was now a murder investigation. But the police, thanks to their own stupidity, had completely destroyed any chance they had at finding vital evidence or securing justice.
And for the next few months, the messaging coming out of the Philadelphia Police Department was a total mess. It was so obvious that the police could not investigate this case. And the media jumped all over it. Headlines screamed of no progress, incompetence, a killer on the loose, and also the complete lack of police updates to the Greenbergs. Philadelphia police and the prosecutors were now firmly stuck with a very high-profile killing of a pretty first-grade teacher from a prominent family who lived in a very safe part of town who was murdered in her own home. And they had no answers.
Then, on the 4th of April 2011, the next plot twist surfaced. Dr. Marlon Osborne, the pathologist who had ruled that Ellie's death was a homicide in his preliminary report, published his official report alongside Ellie's death certificate. And this time, the manner of death was listed, once again, as a suicide.
Like most of you listening, the Greenbergs couldn't believe it. They were destroyed that their daughter, their only child, Ellie, was dead. All they had wanted was justice. But now, to be told again that this was suicide, after all the things they had learned between January and April about the night itself, the evidence and the piss-poor investigation, it must have been unbearable.
Knowing that they needed all the help that they could get, in 2012, the Greenbergs hired civil rights attorney Larry Krasner. And Krasner agreed that there were a hell of a lot of issues with regards to Ellie's death. But when he was elected as Philadelphia's DA, he had to step away from the case. Krasner passed it to the state attorney general for review, and it became clear straight away that the state attorney general and their office were dragging their collective feet.
Enter Tom Brennan and Joseph Pedraza in 2013. Pedraza is the Greenberg's attorney, and he's been on this case with the family now for years. And Tom Brennan is my hero. He's a retired Pennsylvania State Police officer who trained with the FBI's Behavioral Sciences Unit. And he said that when he took one look at this case, he knew people were lying. And he's been working on this case now for over a decade, completely pro bono. Which was helpful, because he's an incredibly experienced investigator, but also because the Greenbergs estimate that they have now spent, at the time of recording this, well over $700,000 of their own money doing what the police should have done.
That is a lot of money, and that is because expertise doesn't come cheap. Alongside Tom and Pedraza, the Greenbergs hired renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht and Dr. Wayne Ross. And they both agreed that, quote, based upon a reasonable degree of medical certainty, it is our professional opinion that the manner of death of Ellen Greenberg is strongly suspicious of homicide. So where are they getting that from? What is the evidence?
Well, there's a lot of it. And it's definitely going to spill over into next week's episode as well, when we get into the autopsy results specifically. But for now, let's start with what Doctors Wecht and Ross found. They discovered that there was evidence of a stab wound which penetrated the cranial cavity and severed the cranial nerves of Ellie's brain. As a result, she would have experienced severe pain, cranial nerve dysfunction, and traumatic brain signs, as well as symptoms including numbness, tingling, bradycardia, respiratory depression, neurogenic shock, and impaired loss of consciousness, all making it highly improbable that she would have been able to keep stabbing herself with the force required for the final penetration, which was the knife going 4 inches into her own chest. Because remember, that's where the knife's found, so that has to be the last stab wound.
And there's also the bruising. The doctors discovered bruising on Ellie's body in various different places, and also in various states of healing, which possibly points to a sustained campaign of abuse in the weeks and months before her death. And then we've got the fresher bruising around Ellie's neck. Dr. Ross said in his report, there was a mark over the front of the neck which is consistent with a fingernail mark. There were multiple bruises under the neck and in the strap muscles over the right side of the neck. These patterns are compatible with manual strangulation. And if you really want to, you can argue all day long about whether Ellie could or would have been able to stab herself at least 20 times. But who, I implore you to consider, strangles themselves to death with their own hands? I defy you to find one example.
Yes. I also defy anybody to find me one example of a person who stabbed themselves to death over 20 times. At least 20 times. Yes. In the back of the head. Yeah. Like I said, there is a lot more evidence that we're going to come on to when we talk about the autopsy next week.
But for now, we're going to ruin your day. We're going to listen to the 911 calls that Sam Goldberg made after he claimed that he had found Ellie in the flat.
Oh, I need everything out. I just walked to my apartment. She is on the floor with blood everywhere.
What is the address?
4601 Flat Rock Road. Please come help
4601
now. Flat Rock Road.
Is this a house or apartment?
Oh no! Oh no!
Apartment.
It's an apartment.
What apartment number?
Please hurry, please.
Where's she bleeding from?
I don't know. I can't tell.
No, so you have to calm yourself down in order to get you some help.
I'm sorry. I don't know. I'm looking at her right now. I I can't see anything. There's nothing broken. She's bleeding. Ellie,
You don't know where she's bleeding from, can
Ellie.
what's coming from?
I think her head. I think she hit her head. I think, but it's everywhere.
Okay,
It's everywhere.
she might have fallen. Do you know what happened?
She may have slipped. There's blood on the table. Her face is a little purple.
Okay, hold on for rescue for her. Stay on the phone. What's the address? No,
4601 Flat Rock Road. Please hurry.
4601 Flat Rock.
Yes.
What's wrong?
I went downstairs to go work out. I came back up. The door was latched. My fiance's inside. She wasn't answering. So after about a half hour, I decided to break it down. I see her now just on the floor with blood. She's not responding.
Okay, is she breathing? Look at her chest. I need you to calm down, and I need you to look at her chest. It's really.
I really don't think she is.
Listen to me. Someone's on the way. Look at her chest. Is she flat on her back?
She's on her back. So I bring her.
Look at her chest and tell me if it's going up and down, up and down.
I don't see her moving.
Okay, do you know how to do CPR?
I don't.
Okay, I can tell you what to do, okay, until they get there. I want you to keep her.
Oh, God.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, okay.
Willing to do CPR with me over the phone so they
I have to, right?
Okay, so get her flat on her back, bare her chest, okay? You want to rip her shirt off. Okay. Kneel down by her side.
Oh, my God. Ellie, please.
Listen, you can't freak out, sir, because you
Okay, I'm trying not. Her shirt won't come off. It's a zipper. Oh, my God. She stabbed herself.
Where?
She fell on a knife. Oh, no, her knife's sticking out.
Her what?
There's a knife sticking out of her heart.
Oh, she stabbed herself?
I guess so. I don't know where she fell on it. I don't know.
Okay, well, don't touch it.
Okay, so I just let her here now. I mean, what do I do?
No, I mean, you can't. If the knife is at her chest, it's going to be kind of hard for you to do CPR at this time.
Oh, no. Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Police, which operator? 277.
Is someone coming here?
Yes, they are. You said 4601 Flat Rock, right?
Yes.
Okay, someone's on the way. And the knife is still inside?
Mr. What?
The knife is still inside of her?
Yes, I didn't take it out.
Was it her chest or what area?
It looks like it's right in her heart.
Okay, someone's on the way out there. Okay, just get.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
How old is she?
27.
27. And there's no sign of life at all?
No, please don't be. What?
Pinch her under her arm and tell me if she responds to pain.
Ellie. She's not. Her arm and her hands are still warm. I don't know if that means, but there's blood everywhere. I mean.
I know, but you can't. And the knife is still inside of her. How far? Can you see how far it went in?
It looks pretty deep.
Okay.
It looks like it's a long knife.
Don't touch anything. Yeah, don't touch anything. Okay.
I'm not touching anything. I can't believe this.
Wait, it was just you there with her?
Yeah, there's only one here.
And she ran in the door. You said latched it shut.
No. I went downstairs to work out, and when I came back up, the door was latched. Like it was, it wasn't like it was like locked from the inside, and I'm yelling, so I was yelling and
Into?
No.
So there's no sign of a break-in?
No sign of a break-in at all. I mean, there will be when you get here because I had to break the latch, but to get in.
Okay, 4601 Flat Rock, and this is a house, right?
It's an apartment. Apartment.
Okay, that was all.
Oh my God. All right, thank you. Bye.
Quite a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I mean, from the off, the two major things that stick out is he does seem quite concerned with establishing his alibi rather than helping her.
Yeah. I think the thing that stands out, if we go start at least with the top of the call, is him being like, I can't tell where the bleeding's coming from, right? I don't know if Sam Goldberg had blood on him or not when the police took him away. It's just something we don't have that information, right? If I came home and I found my partner lying unconscious on the floor with blood everywhere, I'm going to be touching them. I'm going to be picking them up. I'm going to be trying to see what's going on. He is like, I can't tell. I can't see where the bleeding is. What do you mean you can't see where the bleeding is coming from?
I mean, if she'd been stabbed 20 times, you probably can't.
All over? And the fact that he says he can't see the knife until he starts to
That's the
do
bit.
the CPR?
That's the bit. Quite often when you listen to 911 calls, the person is getting frustrated because the dispatcher is asking seemingly innocuous questions, right? So one could argue that he's like, you know, I don't think this is why he's doing it, but could argue that he's like, I'm just going to tell them the lead up so I don't have to deal with all of that shit, because we've heard that hundreds of times. And then that, again, it's the totality of the whole thing. Like, that on its own, I'm all right with. Yeah, it's also not great when the dispatcher talks about CPR and he just goes, I'm going to have to.
That's the bit when I first heard that 911 call that made my jaw drop. When he's like, well, I have to, don't I? What? Like, okay, maybe, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he's in shock. Maybe he's just scared to do anything wrong. And that's why he's worried to do CPR, because he doesn't know how to and he's worried. But then you hear what is, in my opinion, the worst acting I've ever heard on a 911 call. When he prepares to do CPR, he says, her shirt's stuck, won't come off, the zipper's stuck. Oh, there's a knife sticking out of her heart. She stabbed herself. She fell on a knife.
That's the bit.
Firstly, the fact that he's acting like he didn't see the knife.
That for me, everything else, I can be like, all right.
Yeah.
There is no way you didn't see it.
It's a fucking big knife. And it's one of those knives, I've seen a picture of it, where the blade is as big as the handle.
Right.
So you're not seeing the handle sticking out of Ellie's fucking chest. And the fact that he says it like he's trying to pull the zipper down to do CPR and something's getting in the way and he doesn't know what it is. And then he's like, oh my God, it's a knife. It's bizarre that he acts like out of nowhere there is suddenly a knife in her chest. Sorry, he says heart. Like, he literally says the knife is in her heart, which I thought was a very strange phrase to say. Again, you know, on its own, not the most alarming thing. But yeah, it's very weird. This knife is a 10-inch knife. It was plunged 4 inches into Ellie's chest. And like I said, the handle is as big as the blade. Would have been a very noticeable handle sticking out of her chest. I cannot believe that he couldn't have seen it when he first discovered Ellie. Yet on the call, Sam acts like he didn't see the knife until he started trying to do CPR. For me, it's completely unbelievable. And then when they're like, okay, you can't do CPR if there's a knife. Oh no, oh my goodness. Okay. Ugh. Also, if I found someone with a knife in their chest, I wouldn't immediately say they'd stabbed themselves or that they'd fallen on a knife.
No, I don't think I would either. And there's other stuff as well. He says that there's blood everywhere. There categorically wasn't. You can Google the crime scene photos, the few they actually did manage to take, and actually only one of them has been leaked. But it's very clear that there's very little blood on the floor. So why does he keep saying that there is so much of it? Sam also tells the operator that Ellie was on her back, and he tells him that when he's meant to start CPR. But Ellie wasn't on her back when the police arrived. So we'll get more into the details of Ellie's injuries in just a second, but first off, we've got more to cover on the call.
Sam says there was no sign of a break-in. When the operator asks him, is there any sign of a break-in, he says, no, there's none. My question is, how does he know? He doesn't say he checked the flat. He says he broke into the flat and, you know, the CCTV proves that he breaks in at like 6:29 and he calls the police at 6:31. When did he check the flat? How does he know there isn't still someone in there? Someone who latched the door from the inside when they killed Ellie. If I came home one day and found Sam dead on the floor having been stabbed and the door was latched from the inside, I'd freak the fuck out that there was still somebody in the house who'd done that and then locked the door from the inside. But Sam Goldberg is so sure that there is no intruder. How is he so sure about that? He seems to say to the operator that it's because there's no sign that the door had been damaged before he himself broke it down. But that isn't proof an intruder wasn't inside. Ellie could have let them in.
And there's a balcony.
How is he so sure?
You might be wondering, if Sam did kill Ellie, why wouldn't he make it look like an intruder had done it? It is such an unbelievable suicide. Why wouldn't you just make it an intruder instead? Well, in the words of Cerruti's hero Tom Brennan, the best way to get away with homicide is to have it ruled a suicide. And he's right. If you say that there was an intruder and the police investigate the murder properly, sooner or later, once they have ruled out an exterior killer, all eyes are going to be firmly set on you.
Because the CCTV showed nobody came and went through that door, the snow on the balcony is undisturbed. So if you're the only person that was in and out of that flat, if they're opening this as a homicide investigation, you are going to be suspect number 1.
And, as we'll illustrate further next week, it's basically impossible for victims' families to legally challenge a manner of death ruling by a medical examiner or a coroner in Pennsylvania. So, once they say it's suicide, that's it. Case closed, and that's what happened. So, from a nefarious and clandestine point of view, this is smart. Horrible, but smart. However, I just don't think Sam Goldberg is that smart. I don't think he would have come to this conclusion on his own. I think Uncle Jimmy, the very important lawyer, may have done the thinking on this one during that 3-way call that they had before his nephew called 911. Uncle Jimmy is not just a lawyer, remember, he was a prosecutor.
So finally, let's, just finish off the conversations around this call. Let's talk about Sam's tone and demeanour. And yes, usual disclaimers, you can never know for sure how a person is going to react to a shock or trauma or grief. There is no right response that you're looking for here. But saying that, however people react, either being hysterical or totally stoic or somewhat in between, the key thing is that they're typically pretty consistent. But Sam Goldberg is all over the place during these relatively short calls. 1 second he's hysterical, screaming, Ellie, Ellie, no. Then he's calm, then he's upset again. And look, again, I'm going to say it, this on its own wouldn't be nearly enough evidence of something nefarious. But we have so much more. And as always with these cases, I'll say it again, it's about the totality of the evidence.
And it just gets worse and worse. There was also no explanation as to how and why there was a pristine white bathroom towel in Ellie's left hand.
Nobody ever explains that. The police don't, they just note it down. No thought is made on that whatsoever. She's literally found with a completely unstained white bathroom towel, not a kitchen towel that she maybe grabbed or something happened. Why is that in her hand? Nothing, no explanation.
And also, why were there trails of dried blood that ran horizontally down Ellen's face? From her eye, across her nose, onto her cheek. Ellen was found with her head and shoulders propped up against the kitchen cabinets, with her head hanging forward. If that was the position she was in when she died, the blood would have dripped down her face in vertical lines. So it looks as if someone moved Ellie after she died, long enough after that the blood on her face dried. That doesn't happen that quickly, especially if your heart's not beating.
And it also definitely doesn't happen if you did it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And Sam said to 911 that Ellie was on her back, remember? So if it was true that Ellie was on her back when he found her, and the blood flowing horizontally across her face could prove that, why did he move her into a sitting position afterwards? Especially after 911 told him not to move or touch anything after he found the knife in her chest. And if he or someone moved Ellie before the 911 call, and Sam just lied that he'd moved Ellie onto her back during the CPR conversation, then why did they move her? This is a key question because it really does seem like Ellie died on her back, lay there for long enough for the blood to dry horizontally across her face while her head was tipped to the side, and then someone moved her into the sitting position. Why would someone do that? And maybe this is a bit far-fetched thinking, but let's talk about it, because people who stab themselves to death don't tend to do it whilst they're standing, because then your body is going to fall, and you know that. Typically, they tend to be sitting. So, if there was staging of the crime scene, maybe that's why Ellie's body was moved, because she was definitely on her back for a significant amount of time before being propped up. And it also really looks like she was definitely standing when the stabbing started. Because, again, if you look at the crime scene photo, there are drips of blood that have fallen on the kitchen cabinets from above where Ellie's body was discovered.
It's already quite a lot, but there is even more. As we said, we don't know everything. The files aren't public and they never will be. But from the photos that have been mysteriously leaked, you can see that the knife block in the kitchen, where the knife that stabbed Ellie came from, was knocked over on the worktop. The remaining knives had fallen out and scattered all around. Some of them had fallen into the sink, which is a pretty obvious sign of struggle that's just ignored. It also seemed like Ellie was preparing a snack. There was a colander of blueberries on the worktop and a peeled orange. So, in order for this to be a suicide, we would have to believe that for some reason Ellie, in the middle of making a fruit salad, lost it, grabbed a knife, knocked over the knife block, and then stabbed herself at least 20 times in the head, scalp, back of her neck, chest, and stomach. Possible, yes, in the very extremities of possibility, but it's not likely.
No. And some people question this whole fruit salad thing, right, saying that that's not actually what Ellie was doing. When I first heard that, I was like, what are you on about? But we're going to talk about it next week, about what we actually think happened here. But I do think the knife block being knocked over is such a bizarre thing for the police to ignore. But that is where we're going to have to stop for today, gang. So go process all that information. And then join us next week, where we will get into the broken down door, those infamous internet searches, the secret meeting that led to Dr. Osborne changing his ruling, what Sam Goldberg finally said when he broke his 14-year silence in December 2024, as well as all the allegations of cover-up and conspiracy. We'll see you all then. And in the meantime, I have to plug this. Please go check out Gavin Fish's coverage of this case. He's a YouTuber, and he really has gone above and beyond with this. He's worked closely with Ellie's parents for years. And he's also had access to crime scene photos that the public has never seen. So when I say things like the knife block was knocked over and the knives were scattered around the worktop and in the sink, I only know that because Gavin Fish has seen those pictures, shown to him by the Greenbergs, and he has told us. And he's also done a huge amount to help the Greenbergs try and get justice. Also, and we don't always say this, but also please post about this case on your socials any way you can, because the Greenbergs need all the help they can get. And at this point, honestly, public pressure and outrage is the only thing that is going to make a difference. And I also just want to be clear. I know we're making it very obvious, or at least I'm making it very obvious who I fucking think did this and what I think happened. And we're going to go into very explicit detail next week. But in the last 14 years that Ellie's family have been fighting for justice, they have never ever pointed the finger specifically at anyone. They are simply asking that their daughter's death be properly investigated as a homicide. So don't drag them into your accusations is all I'm saying.
No.
Because the people involved in this are particularly litigious, and the Greenbergs don't need any more fucking stress.
No. And the last thing we need is any sort of vigilantism. Please be careful. Yeah. Do what you can to support in a nice way.
Yeah.
Don't go throwing any fingers because it doesn't help anybody.
No.
But we're going to be throwing our own fingers next week.
Having said that. So yeah, that's it, guys. That is part 1 of the death of Ellie Greenberg. And Happy New Year. It's good to be back. And we'll see you next week for part 2.
Bye.
Bye. I'm Saruti.
I'm Hannah.
And welcome to Red Handed, where it's part 2 of our series on the murder of Ellie Greenberg.
Yes, absolutely. To both of those things. Can confirm it is part 2 and can confirm she did not kill herself.
Thank you. Case closed. Thank you so much for listening, guys. We'll see you next week where we'll be covering another case. No, obviously, if your blood wasn't boiling after last week's episode, then I think the next hour or so might just do the trick. And we're sorry to start everybody off in 2025. Is that? Yes, 2025. With such a rager. But needs must. Now, as we mentioned last week, Ellie's autopsy was carried out on the 27th of January 2011 by Dr. Marlon Osborne, a medical examiner in Philadelphia. Initially, Dr. Osborne came to the conclusion that this was indeed a homicide. After all, he was presented with an otherwise fit and healthy young woman with at least 20 stab wounds, ranging from 1 centimetre deep to over 10 centimetres deep.
And for a few months after this, the Philadelphia Police Department worked the case as a homicide, although they had very little to go on since the apartment had been professionally cleaned and Ellie's laptops and phone had been in the possession of her fiancé's uncle for 2 whole days. The pressure was mounting as the country demanded answers over the murder of a young, smart, ambitious, pretty, freckly first-grade teacher. But the police had nothing. And we say pretty, not because it's important that she was pretty. It's because of the world we live in, people care more.
She's like the safest of people, right? As far as the world looking in. She's from a good family. She's engaged to a guy who's from a good family. Like, she's been killed in her home, and she is a fucking first-grade teacher who's covered in freckles. Like, it's just too much for the police to hide from. And the shock only intensified when Dr. Osborne's final report came out in April 2011, so 3 months after that preliminary report, with the manner of death now stated as suicide, just as the police had initially claimed. And they now tried to bolster this theory of suicide by pointing to Ellie's mental health at the time she died. It's no secret, Ellie had been struggling in the lead up to her death. Her parents and friends had all noticed a change in her. She wasn't her bubbly self anymore, and she had started deferring to Sam on all sorts of decisions that she'd easily have made herself before. But Ellie was getting help. She was seeing a psychiatrist, Dr. Ellen Berman. And Dr. Berman had diagnosed Ellie with adjustment disorder with anxiety, a condition that can be connected with suicidal thoughts. Ellie was also on anti-anxiety medication, and some people have pointed out that perhaps the meds had made her suicidal. Maybe. But her psychiatrist had noted that Ellie was, quote, not suicidal. And in the days before she died, Dr. Berman had also written in her notes about Ellie, way better, 75% better. And look, obviously not everyone leaves a note when they kill themselves, but it is worth mentioning that no note was ever found.
And people can be wrong, absolutely. There's actually quite a haunting phenomenon surrounding suicide that in the days leading up to the actual act, people can appear a lot happier. And the reason for that is because they've realised how they can solve the problem. So loved ones quite often will say, but they seemed so much better. And that is sometimes the reason why. Not this time.
No.
But it does happen.
It does absolutely happen. And I do want to point to a particular text that Ellie had sent her mother in the days before she died, because she had been trying various different medications. Dr. Berman had been trying various different things to try and help Ellie alleviate her anxiety. And she was put on Klonopin. And she texted her mother saying, the Klonopin worked. I feel so much better. Thank God, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. She was a person who was actively trying to ease her symptoms. It doesn't seem like she was a person looking for a way out. I know everyone's screaming about the internet searches. We're going to get to it. But facts are also these facts.
Yeah, Klonopin's fucking great, man. I wish we had it in this country. Anyway, moving on. The point is more, I think, why is everyone so quick to jump to her mental health deteriorating, not being linked to an abusive relationship with Sam Goldberg?
Yeah, everyone's like, she must have killed herself. Not everyone. The people who believe she killed herself are like, well, she was suicidal and that's why she killed herself. People in that camp seem very reluctant to be like, she may have had poor mental health because of an abusive relationship and he is the reason that she's dead because he killed her.
Right. And it seems blatantly obvious, but I'm going to say it anyway. Just because you're struggling with your mental health, that doesn't mean you are immune to someone murdering you.
Yep.
And Dr. Berman said that she'd asked Ellen about abuse, but apparently she had denied any verbal or physical confrontations. But once again, doesn't mean it wasn't happening. It's a very shameful thing. It's not a shameful thing. People feel a lot of shame around it. And it's very difficult for people to admit what they are going through, what is happening to them. And we also know that the point at which a woman attempts to leave an abusive situation is when she is most at risk. And that day, Ellie had started to pack up all of her makeup, and she'd taken off her engagement ring. Ellie had also filled up her car with petrol that day, and her parents suspected it was so she could leave and drive all the way to Harrisburg. Ellie had also texted a cousin of hers in the weeks before, asking if she could go and stay with her for a bit. This cousin asked if Sam would be joining as well, and Ellie didn't reply. Also, Ellie had been home for hours after she got sent home from work, but she was found wearing her snow boots, like she was leaving, go somewhere else. So, for all of those reasons, we don't really think the anxiety-suicide theory adds up.
Yeah, look, in the words again of Dr. Wecht, who we introduced you to last week, he says, rule number 1 is you rule out homicide, rule out homicide, rule out homicide, and then you look for other potential reasons for why this person is dead.
I thought you were going to say Sherlock Holmes. He basically says the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or quote whoever you want for this. But yeah, that should have been the number 1 aim. And the police do not rule out homicide. They just rule in suicide. And yeah, it's very strange. And this is why, at the end of last week's episode, I know a lot of people talk about the fruit theory, like why would she be making a fruit salad and then suddenly kill herself? I don't necessarily know that that's the case. We don't know. We're going to talk about the timeline and all of the things we don't know. We don't know who was making the fucking fruit salad, right? But what we do know is that Ellie's wearing her snow boots, even though she's been in the house for hours by this point. Why? Where is she going? She fills up her petrol, like you said, and her family and everyone who knows her says that Ellie was obsessively clean, obsessively tidy. All her stuff was like out on her bed, like she was packing things up. I don't think Ellie Greenberg, from what I've read about what her friends say about her, people who shared a room with her in uni, would have just had all her stuff out if she wasn't packing it up. Again, I know this is just very anecdotal. But again, it's another brick in that wall. This is the challenge with this case because so much of it is just, oh, well, this and this and this. And one of the questions I keep coming back to is, who knows what other evidence that there could have been in this case if the police had handled the scene properly that night? For example, like you said, Hannah, last week, they didn't even use luminol. So we don't even know if someone tried to clean up the mess. Obviously, if they had done that and there was smear patterns of somebody cleaning up, it's a murder. But we just don't know. We don't even know the time of Ellie's death because they didn't take her body temperature. It was just noted that there was a little rigor mortis in her hands and feet, which could place her death between 2 to 4 hours before she was pronounced dead at 6:40 p.m. on the 27th of January 2011. So that still leaves, as far as I can see, 2 windows of possible death, pre or post Sam Goldberg's gym trip.
And we think that Sam killed Ellie before he went to the gym, because we know that at about 3:40 p.m, Ellie had been texting with her friend Alicia Young. She was talking about work. Those were the last outgoing text messages recorded on Ellie's phone. Sam Goldberg's phone also went quiet at around the same time. So we're talking 3:40 to 5:30 p.m. on the day that Ellie died. The records show absolutely no incoming or outgoing calls to Sam's phone. And then at 4:50 p.m, Sam was seen on CCTV getting out of the lift and walking toward the gym. And then he returns at about 5:15ish, but he doesn't break the door down. Nearly an hour. Why would that be?
The detectives even asked him, why did you wait nearly an hour before you broke the door down? And he was like, oh, I thought she might have been washing her hair or sat around with her headphones and doing some work. Like, I just feel like he's trying to extend that time period, right? So it doesn't seem like, oh, you went to the gym, Ellie died, you went to the gym, you came straight back, found her. It's like, it's too short a time. He wants to extend that time frame for Ellie to have killed herself in that space of time that he is providing himself an alibi because the door is locked from the inside.
So for our money, Sam Goldberg killed Ellie in the hour between 3:40 and 4:50, and then he went to the gym.
It's the only thing that makes sense to me, really. So let's talk about why. Why do we think this happened? Why did Sam Goldberg kill Ellie Greenberg? I personally think that he and Ellie were likely having some issues for quite a long time. As friends and family have said that Ellie had started to change. And there's also this narrative of his family being quite scrutinizing towards Ellie, and that she had tried very hard to impress them. And there, let's mention this because I know it's something that people will accuse us of ignoring if we don't talk about it. There is a lot of suspicion that Ellie had an eating disorder and that she was very obsessed with being thin, with maintaining a weight. There were searches that even her parents admitted to, that she was worried about the medication she was taking making her gain weight, all of these things. And yes, I also think that could be paired up with the obsessive cleaning. Even Dr. Berman says in her notes when Ellie's in her office, she's obsessively tidying things and neatening things up. I'm not saying Ellie Greenberg didn't have an eating disorder, and that, again, for some people leads to the suicidal ideation part of that. But I think that can also be triggered by somebody being in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, and I don't know any woman who hasn't Googled that.
Yes, quite. So yes, I think there's problems in this relationship for quite a while. I think Ellie finally decided that she wanted to leave. Why does it happen now? From Dr. Berman's own notes, she was feeling better. She was feeling stronger. And I think she was ready to go. I think she packed up, or she was starting to pack up. And I think Sam Goldberg fucking lost it. I think he blitz attacked Ellie, smashing her over the head and stabbing her in the back and neck. And I think it all happened so fast that she couldn't grab the knife, because one of the key reasons, as we'll see, that the police and the medical examiner's office say that they think this was a suicide is because the lack of cuts to Ellie's hands from trying to grab a knife. We talked about this in the Darlie Routier episode. Typically when people are being stabbed, they are going to grab that knife. She doesn't, but I don't think that rules out the possibility that she was murdered. There's a massive fucking gash in her head. But I think the bruises to Ellie's body, which I absolutely think we have to count as defensive wounds, came from Sam Goldberg grabbing her, restraining her, and, as Dr. Wecht and Dr. Ross say, strangling her. Then I think the red mist lifts, and Sam Goldberg looks at what he's done. He calmly goes to the gym and comes back to start the act.
But if you're still stuck on the internet searches, let's have a look at them. The police claimed that they had discovered on Ellie's laptop and on her phone searches for suicide and fast, painless death. But what's interesting is that when the FBI took her laptops at the start of the investigation to assist the police, they made no note of those searches at all. In fact, they stated that the searches on Ellie's laptops and on her phone were unremarkable.
Guy DeAndrea, the assistant DA we mentioned last week, who took a look at this case again in 2015, also said in those original case notes there was no mention of these internet searches.
The police, their quite weak rebuttal to that is that they came across them later on.
But Tom Brennan, when he heard this, was incredibly confused because he had had possession of Ellie's laptops for years. So how did the police find it later? Well, the police said that they had cloned the hard drives of Ellie's laptops while they were still in their custody, and that's where they'd got the search results from. Which, in my opinion, is weird enough. But remember, before that, those laptops and Ellie's phone had been in Uncle Jimmy's custody for 2 whole days. Also, as Guy DeAndrea, the assistant DA, points out, stabbing yourself 20 times is a bizarre way to kill yourself if your aim was a fast, painless death.
Yeah, there are loads of ways to do it, that isn't one. And even if you think it's too far-fetched to believe that somebody planted those suicide searches on her laptops and her phone, grow up, it's really not that hard to do. And also, these searches might not actually be what they seem. They're known as shadow searches, which is when you're reading an online article and then there are other articles that are hyperlinked throughout it that are connected to the story. They're plugged in all over the place to keep you clicking through the site. And it looks as if Ellie was reading an article about a model sex game death, and she kept clicking onto other articles, leading her through to other weird stories, and these show up as shadow searches.
Yeah, like some of the most damning searches that people will point to in this case are shadow searches. So ones like you just explained. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are.
And sure, there is one website which explicitly was about suicide, but as most suicide websites are, it's about not killing yourself. Either way, the laptops are a total waste of time, and so is her phone, because Uncle Jimmy had them for 2 days. He broke the chain of custody, So even if it had the most convincing evidence on it in the world, which they don't, it still would be null and void.
Yep. And also, people who point to the internet searches to say that this is why it's a suicide. The police had decided it was a suicide on the night itself, long before they discovered the internet searches. That wasn't a reason that played into their decision to rule it a suicide on that night. Nobody checked her laptop or her phones that night. And this judgment of it being a suicide that was made on the night they found Ellie's body was made based on a few things, right? 1, there was no immediate sign of an intruder. 2, Sam Goldberg stayed at the scene and was cooperative. 3, Ellie had, in their words, no defensive wounds. And 4, of course, the door having been latched from the inside.
First off, Ellie absolutely did have defensive wounds. She had at least 11 bruises on her body from her wrists, her thighs, abdomen and arms, and they were all in various different states of healing. There were also the bruises to her neck, which we told you about last week, which could be consistent with manual strangulation. There is no explanation from what we could find for Ellie's bruises anywhere on any official record at all. And it also doesn't seem like the police made any attempt to determine how Ellie got them. They never even asked Sam Goldberg about them.
Dr. Osborne puts them in his autopsy notes. He doesn't miss them. He puts them in his autopsy notes and just doesn't ask any questions about it. And nobody asks any questions about it. It's not that this is something that has been discovered later. It is in the autopsy notes, just with 0 questions.
So, with no other choice, in October that year, the Greenbergs filed a civil suit against the medical examiner's office and Dr. Osborne. The Greenbergs wanted the courts to review the evidence that Tom Brennan had dug up and force the medical examiner's office to change the manner of death from suicide to homicide, or at the very least, to an undetermined death. Because this was the key issue standing in the way of a true investigation. As long as the verdict was suicide, no law enforcement agency would look into Ellie's death.
And yes, of course, I can hear some of you screaming. The courts cannot be allowed to force the ME's office to change a verdict. And look, I get it. I do. As the state said, they can't allow the ME's office to lose its independence. But in this case, it seemed very obvious that the loss of independence had already happened. Because when Supercop Tom Brennan started to try and work out why Osborne had changed his mind from homicide to suicide, he realized that this move had come following a clandestine meeting between members of the Philadelphia Police Department, the DA's office, and the medical examiner's office. There are no notes as to what was said in this meeting, but we know that it was after this that Dr. Osborne changed his verdict to match what the police had wanted all along. And I cannot stress to you how fucking unprecedented that is.
The police and the prosecution categorically do not have the authority to dictate to the coroner what the conclusion of an autopsy should be. As we said last week, the coroner will look at both the physical evidence of the body and the circumstances of the death. Tom Brennan knew that he needed to get to the bottom of what had gone on here.
So, on the 13th of September 2013, Tom Brennan and Dr. Wayne Ross had a call with Dr. Osborne and his boss, then Philadelphia Chief Medical Examiner, Dr. Samuel Galino. Dr. Galino has since left that position after controversy over his office's handling of the remains of the MOVE bombing victims, an incident which we actually covered over on Shorthand last year.
But anyway, during this call, Dr. Ross challenged several of Dr. Osborne's findings and conclusions from the autopsy. Osborne pushed back, but it was all pretty cordial. Until Tom asked Osborne why he changed the manner of death from homicide to suicide, to which Dr. Osborne responded, "I changed it at the insistence of the police because they said there was a lack of defensive wounds." Tom Brennan really could not believe what he was hearing, so he asked, "Since when do the police have anything to do with making a medical decision regarding the cause and manner of a death?" Dr. Osborne did not respond to that question, and the call was very swiftly ended. The lawsuits had to go ahead because the medical examiner's office was clearly keeping quiet.
He's really let the cat out the bag there. I think Osborne says it, and then he's like, when Tom asked that question, he's like,
yeah, give me my cat back.
yeah, it's too late. Cat's dead.
I need to put it in a bag and go to St. Ives.
And so, with the lawsuit underway, the next time the Greenberg's team would question Osborne and Galeno would be in April 2021, during their depositions for the lawsuit. Now, a key part of these depositions was to cross-examine Dr. Osborne's findings from Ellie's autopsy. When Dr. Ross had examined the autopsy in detail, he was shocked. Osborne had noted, quote, the anterior neck had no hemorrhage or injuries. But there was an internal hemorrhage to Ellie's neck. I've seen pictures of it. When confronted with a picture that I have seen of the hemorrhage to the inside of Ellie's neck during this deposition, Dr. Osborne confirmed that yes, that was indeed a hemorrhage, one that he had admitted from his report. And he also said that it would have been caused by blunt trauma of some sort. But he said that he didn't think it was down to strangulation because Ellie's hyoid bone was still intact and there was no petechia of her eyes. But there was petechia of Ellie's eyes that Dr. Osborne had also not noted down in his autopsy. And also, let's be clear, yes, the hyoid bone is in the neck, and in many cases of strangulation it does break, but it doesn't always break.
Particularly, I can never remember, but once we knew how much pressure and how long you do have to exert on a person to strangle them to death. And it's a lot. But she's already dying, you know? So, like, yes, we do often point to a hyoid bone being broken, Rodney Alcala being one of the ones that's jumping to mind. But I think we can safely assume that strangulation is not the only thing that fucking killed her. She's running on empty. She's been stabbed 100 million times.
And again, the fact is you're looking at petechia of the eyes, which there was, and a hemorrhage to Ellie's neck. On the inside, 2 signs of strangulation, but he says, I didn't write it down because the hyoid bone wasn't broken and there was no petechia, but there was petechia. I'm just stupid and didn't write that down. It is mind-boggling. So yeah, bad stuff. And it only gets worse because we also discovered during this deposition that Dr. Osborne had in fact been reprimanded multiple times prior to Ellie's autopsy for having had at least 18 cases in his past with serious errors and discrepancies. And when Dr. Galeno, his boss, was asked before this was discovered, have there ever been any concerns over Dr. Osborne's work? And he said, no, none. But he knew damn well that there had been multiple reprimands by other people. Help!
And they were also asked about the previously undisclosed meeting. And they said that the police wanted to present additional evidence that they felt showed that the death of Ellie Greenberg was a suicide and not a homicide. Galeno even said that he couldn't remember the names of the officers there present, but we know who they are. It was Sergeant Tim Cooney and Detective John McNamee. And everyone in this case deserves to be named and shamed. If we can find them, we will say them. Smoke them if you got them. So, Galeno was asked, what evidence did they share with you that was so compelling that your office changed its verdict? And he said, the 2 topics that I remember from that meeting were the absence of defensive cuts on Ellen Greenberg's hands or forearms, and the fact that the door was locked, or the lock was engaged from inside the apartment. Again, the lack of defensive cuts isn't true. They're talking about cuts on her hands, which is what you generally would see. However, if Ellie was blitz attached, which we believe she was, it's entirely probable that she never got a chance to fight back.
And with regards to the door being locked, well, Dr. Osborne had always known that. And the fact that there was no proof that this was true. But apparently, during this secret meeting, the police had apparently told him that there was now a corroborating eyewitness to the fact that the door had been latched from the inside. Philip Hanton. We told you about Philip last week. He's obviously the security guard and the concierge at the building. And the pathologist claimed in this deposition that the police had told them during this secret meeting that the building security guard, Philip Hanton, had gone upstairs to Sam Goldberg's apartment with him that night. Because remember, Sam says, I went down to talk to Philip and asked him if he could break down the door for me. He said no. He said, can I? And he came with me. And he went with him. That's the story. And the police told the medical examiners that Philip had seen the door was latched from the inside and that he had been there when Sam broke down the door and found Ellie. This is a very, very hairy piece of evidence, and I want to be crystal clear. I cannot confirm where this story originated from. In some reports, it says that Sam Goldberg told the police this. But it doesn't say that everywhere. In some places it says the police said it. In some places it says that Philip Hanton said it. We cannot confirm whether Sam Goldberg did indeed tell the police this or not. Or whether the police just said this later to cover their asses. Because again, this was never in the original police report that was written, because Guy DeAndrea, who has seen it, said that it wasn't. And I believe him. But I just want to be totally clear. It came up 3 months later for the first time in this secret meeting.
But whoever actually said this for the first time, Philip, the security guard himself, has said under oath in a deposition of his own that it's just not true. He didn't go up to the apartment with Sam Goldberg. He didn't see that the door was locked, and he never ever saw Ellie's body. And guess what? The CCTV from the building shows Sam Goldberg going back up to his apartment all on his own.
And it also shows Philip Hanton sat at his desk at the front of the building.
Yes. Philip is the only one who's not lying. And we've got a bit of an interview with Philip for you.
Did Sam ever ask you to go, or did you ever go with Sam up to the door when he was trying to get in? Do you know where that story came from?
Came from him. He know I didn't walk up with him. And I get angry when I hear that, because for him to lie on me or any concierge who would have been there at that particular time, says a lot about him.
We were just at Ellen's best friend's house, and she was telling us that she talked to Sam afterwards, and he said that the security guard advised him to use his shoulder to bust open the door.
Really? Okay, if that's what he says, hey, the truth don't need no company, man. You know, if that's what he said, that's what it is for him. My cameras and my guide said I was sitting at the front desk and advised him not to go upstairs. I know he lied. He know he lied. But why doesn't the system say, well, did anybody ever ask him, why did you lie on the guard? That was it. We have proof to say that he, you know, I don't know if anybody talked to him that way. I don't know why they don't talk to him that way. I certainly would talk to him that way, because if I applied my street knowledge to it, I can get to him. Say, what the f*** you talking about, man? You know, f***ing well I wouldn't. I can go to him like that. They're going to arrest me later. You feel me?
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, the police had access to the CCTV and to Philip. If they really did tell the medical examiner's office that they had an eyewitness to the door having been locked 3 months after Ellie died, they were absolutely knowingly lying.
And that is the biggest issue in all this, right? They would have known that Philip Hanton did not go up there with Sam Goldberg. Whether Sam Goldberg told them that or not, they would have known, or they could have easily checked. But they didn't, and they knowingly lied to change the verdict in the manner of death. So right, let's forget the fucking eyewitness that supposedly saw that the door was latched from the inside. That's obviously bullshit. Instead, let's now address the door and the latch itself. Because I know there are still people out there who believe that Ellie really did kill herself. And if the door really was locked from the inside, then yes, you may well be right. Ellie had to have done it to herself. But let's be clear what exactly it is that we're talking about here. The door of the apartment had a deadbolt, but this was not the lock that was on. The latch that Sam Goldberg claims was on was one of those swing guard latches like you find on like hotel room doors.
What that means is, even if it was latched from the inside, those latches are very easy to fiddle with. There are loads of videos and tutorials online about how to put the latch on from the outside.
And also, Melissa Ware, the building manager, even says in a recent interview that she did with CNN that she has at times slammed the door so hard that the latch shut itself from the inside. And she said, if I needed to, I could definitely replicate that.
And actually, since this case, the building doesn't even use those latches on their doors anymore because they are so easy to fuck with. So, as a lot of people speculate online, Sam Goldberg could have put the latch on himself from the outside and pretended that he was locked out and then broken the door down. The problem there, though, is that if that was the truth, it would have been on CCTV.
You would have seen him fiddling around with it. I mean, maybe he slams it hard enough and knows, but that is a big risk to take. You don't know that it's locked from the inside. Like, I don't know.
Potentially, but then equally, police have definitely lost, covered up and hidden evidence from this case, so maybe they do have it. And we've got an example of that. There was a video recording of the apartment that Melissa Ware took, the building manager, and she did that before the flat was professionally cleaned. That tape was handed in to the police, but they vanished it. It's gone, lost.
That's going to be your best source of any form of evidence because the fucking place has been cleaned. She took it before the cleaning crew got there, and they were like, we lost it.
It was only after the Greenbergs threatened the police with another lawsuit that the tape miraculously reappeared years later. So we can't say anything for sure.
No. So let's instead talk about things we actually can examine. Let's talk about the damage to the broken down door. The damage, if you would be so kind, dear listeners, as to go and Google it, you will see that there is very, very minimal damage to the door on the inside of the apartment. Now, as Tom Brennan has explained in his reports, and this is a quote, the only way you can open that sort of lock is if one or other piece is completely dismounted from where it's mounted. That bar isn't going to open up for you any other way. Now look, if you're fiddling with it with a credit card, doing something, using a little tool to open it, whatever, again, don't know that that's not on the CCTV, the police could be hiding it. That could be a way in which there's no damage, right? But Sam Goldberg says he broke down the door and the latch was on. If you take a look at the pictures, the latch is mounted onto the frame of the door and also onto the door itself, and it's screwed in with 3 or 4 screws either side. If you look at it, there is minimal damage where like one screw has fallen out of the side that it's attached to the door frame and it's lifted up a little bit. As Tom Brennan says, one of those must have had to have flung off entirely for the door to open. You cannot get it off if both sides are still mounted to the frame and to the door, and that is exactly what you see here. So basically, if either part of the latch is still attached to the door or a part is attached to the door frame, it's just not going to have come off if Sam Goldberg truly broke down that door and got in. And this just isn't the case here. The photos from the night show that the latch is only partially dislodged. Both sides are still fastened to the door and the jamb with multiple screws. So the damage to the latch wasn't extensive enough for the apartment door to have been broken down. All you can see is that a bit of paint and wood has like splintered and one screw has fallen out, like I said. And coming back to Gavin Fish, the YouTuber I mentioned last week, he actually did a little test on the latch theory. And again, look, I know this isn't scientific, but I do think it's worth mentioning. He attached the same style swing guard latch to a similar wooden door and broke it down. And as predicted in his video, the door frame ripped right off the wall and one entire side of the latch was removed before he was able to get into that room.
So there isn't any proof that the latch was ever on. We've only got Sam Goldberg's word for it. And the damage to the door just doesn't fit his story. The minimal damage to the door actually looks more consistent with someone putting the latch on and wrenching the door from the inside before they went outside and pretended that they'd been locked out. We can't prove any of this for sure, but as we can see, the best reason as to why this case was ruled as a suicide, the locked door, is bullshit. And Osborne himself said in his deposition that if there was any doubt that the fiancée was escorted by the security guard or if it was untrue what he was being told, then this cannot be a suicide. Yeah, cheers. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
It's ridiculous. They're like, okay, so you made the decision on the door being locked from the inside and being told by the police that there was an eyewitness to the fact the door was locked from the inside. And he's like, yes. What if we told you that that's not true? What if we told you there was no eyewitness to the door having been locked from the inside? And he's like, in that case, I would have to change my verdict. That is true, but he hasn't changed his verdict.
Yep, even still, even after he was confronted and then given the CCTV of Goldberg going back to his apartment on his ones, Dr. Osborne refused to change his verdict.
He now claimed that he stuck with suicide because of a snowy meeting with a renowned neuropathologist, Dr. Lucy Rourke Adams. Osborne said he wanted to find out if any of the wounds to Ellie's neck would have rendered her, or could have rendered her, incapable of inflicting the subsequent wounds to herself, and also, we should just chuck in there, incapable of defending herself and therefore getting cuts on her hands, and also whether she was therefore incapable of inflicting that final wound to her chest. And so, to try and do this, apparently, Dr. Osborne took a section of Ellie's spinal cord to Dr. Rourke for what he called a curbside examination.
That's horrible.
He didn't even get to come to his lab. He says, I'll just bring it to you where you work, meet me outside your building, have a look at it, tell me if the injuries to her spinal cord are severe enough that she couldn't have continued stabbing herself.
On top of that, Dr. Osborne said that Dr. Rourke didn't do a microscopic exam. Quite difficult to do that on a curbside, one would imagine. But even still, she was able to tell him that the dura, which is the sheath covering the spinal cord, had been cut, but not the spinal cord itself. Therefore, there was no indication that Ellie had lost motor function, and she could tell all of that from glancing at a section of spinal cord, not the whole thing, in the snow. Possibly. Dr. Rourke has come out and said that she has no memory whatsoever of this meeting taking place, being asked to look at any evidence, and she also has no paperwork, no report, or no invoice to prove that she did that work at all. To which she said if she had looked at it, she would have charged. Dr. Rourke was clear. I must therefore conclude that I did not see the specimen in question. And even Dr. Osborne's boss, Galeno, has said that he does find this whole situation to be quite unlikely.
Even Galeno says he doesn't believe that Osborne showed the spinal column piece to Dr. Rourke.
Why are people lying about very provable things?
I don't know, to give me a brain aneurysm. But Galeno did his own dodgy little investigation. Would you like to hear about it? Because Galeno, according to him, believed that it was, quote, possible for Ellen to have created all of these wounds herself. And he said he found no reason to disagree with the suicide ruling because of a 2019 exam that he had asked another pathologist named Dr. Lindsay Emery to carry out. Now, Dr. Emery, like I said, is another pathologist who works in this medical examiner's office. She's also certified in neuropathology, and Dr. Galeno says that she assessed a section of Ellen's spinal column that was still in storage at the ME's office. And what Dr. Emery did, and what she has to say, is very interesting.
Dr. Emery observed that there were 2 cuts on the specimen she was shown, one to the bone and ligaments in the back of Ellie Greenberg's spinal column, and a matching cut to the dura. These were clearly as a result of what Dr. Emery noted to be bona fide sharp force injury. So not a result of a hand slipping during an autopsy. And what was shocking about these 2 injuries was that there was no hemorrhaging around them. Dr. Emery testified in her deposition saying, a lack of hemorrhage means no pulse. Therefore, Dr. Emery said that if the cut was administered while Ellen was still alive, she would have expected to see hemorrhaging. That seems very obvious. And when asked by Podraza, since you don't see that, would you weigh a little bit more in suggesting that Ellen was dead at the time this wound was administered? To which Dr. Emery replied, yes.
Considering this huge potential bombshell, because in a case like this, it doesn't get much bigger. If you can even say that one wound to Ellie was administered after she was no longer alive, then it is not a suicide. But despite this, how come there was no mention of this anywhere? How was there no mention of Dr. Emery's report? How was there no mention of what Dr. Emery had found? This only came to light after the depositions. Despite always generating a report following an examination, Dr. Emery stated in her deposition that on this occasion, Dr. Galeno had asked her not to, saying that he would just incorporate her findings into his own notes. But guess what? He didn't. Bingo, right?
As a pathologist, as a doctor, someone is commissioning me to examine something which they have paid me to do, and they don't want me to do a written report.
Quite. So, yeah. We might be thinking, bingo. Might be thinking, there we go, we got him. Dr. Emery has come, she's done a deposition, and she has said, I was asked not to write a report, and this is what I found. Well, a month after her deposition, the city filed a written declaration by Dr. Emery in which she, or they, said that she hadn't fully understood the scope of the questions posed to her at the deposition by the city's attorney, and said that there could be several other possibilities for a lack of hemorrhaging. She's a fucking pathologist. I don't think she didn't understand the scope of questions being asked to her in a case where they're trying to file a lawsuit to get the verdict changed from suicide to homicide.
Those silly women not understanding the questions they're being asked.
Oh,
and
fuck
I
me.
beg, what other cause for lack of hemorrhaging could there be?
They say various other things. They say things like there could have been a hemorrhage and it could have been wiped away. It
Oh,
could have been
well,
cleaned.
no, I don't care. I don't want to know.
It could have been cleaned away during the autopsy, which I have listened to experts talk about this, and they're like, maybe to the juror. Maybe it could have been washed away to the juror. It could not have been washed away from the internal injury. Or there'll be people who say it could have been a slip of the hand during the autopsy. But Dr. Emery was very clear that that's not what it was. It was sharp force impact.
So let's talk about them. Let's talk about them stab wounds. The Greenbergs hired a company called BioMX to produce a computer-generated model of the stab wounds that Ellie sustained. And then BioMX assessed those stab wounds to see if it was biomechanically possible for Ellie to have inflicted all of those wounds on herself. And their conclusion was, no, it isn't. There is absolutely no biomechanically possible universe in which she could have done that herself.
And BioMX are specifically used in trials all the time for their expert analysis.
The angles at which the knife, or knives, because there is a theory that there were two knives, but Dr. Osborne's report was so bad we don't even fucking know, so let's move on. The angles at which the knife entered Ellie was not consistent with self-stabbing. Rather, the wounds are consistent with, quote, focalized stabbing by an assailant. Even if Ellie had been super flexible or hypermobile, and therefore able to move her joints into those crazy positions, which some people can do, the force needed to plunge the knife into herself again and again in order to penetrate so deep could not have been generated with her arms in those positions. On top of that, Ellie was right-handed, and some of the wounds go from right to left. Not to mention the fact that her left hand was totally clean, no blood at all, with a towel in it. How are you going to stab yourself 20 times and have one clean hand at the end?
The mind boggles.
I don't have one anymore.
Now, the 3D analysis done by BioMX also showed that 2 of the stab wounds to the back of Ellie's neck were particularly severe. Both were incredibly deep. One penetrated Ellie's vertebra, spinal column, and spinal cord, and the other had entered her brain, just as Dr. Ross and Dr. Wecht had also found. Neither the 3D analysis nor the autopsy have been able to determine the order in which the stab wounds happened. The only thing we can say for sure is that the one to Ellie's chest was the final strike, as the knife was still there when she was found. So if we're saying the ones to her back were that bad, how's she stabbing herself in the chest?
And what's interesting is that the 3D analysis shows that several of the previous stab wounds, such as the neck injury or the gash to her head, would have left Ellie with impaired coordination, semi-consciousness, and unconsciousness. So how could she possibly have put a knife in her chest? To believe it was a suicide, you'd have to believe that Ellie just kept stabbing herself through all the blood, all the pain, all the debilitating effects she would no doubt have been experiencing, and also, if Dr. Emery is to be believed, which I think she is, dying.
Paralysed.
Yes.
It's touched her spinal cord. She would have been paralysed. And I think we don't know the order, like we said, but I think it makes sense that the stabbing to the back happened first and then the stabbing to the front. What are you doing? Back, front, and then final in the chest? Come on. This is so disgusting. I feel so upset by this entire case. It's ludicrous.
And even if you defy the laws of human possibility, why would Ellie Greenberg do all of those things, which are biologically impossible, but never mind? Why would she do that out of the blue? Why would she go through such a violently bloody suicide when she had absolutely no signs of psychosis before? Because it is a psychotic thing.
Thank you. This case, this kind of stabbing death. I'm not saying people don't stab themselves to death. Of course, we've talked about it last week. 2% of suicides in the US, sure, whatever. This is psychotic.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, people were like, Ellie was suffering with anxiety. There is no mention of her acting psychotically. There's no toxicology that shows she was on fucking PCP when she did this to herself.
No. And famously, people who are in psychosis don't lie about it because they don't know that they are. That's the whole point.
She's not going to be able to cover that up.
No.
And also, I think it's definitely worth mentioning that Ellie's obviously covered in stab wounds, but I think the injury to her head. Again, you guys can look at pictures of like the autopsy. It's the biomecs basically take the autopsy photos and they've created like a computer generated version of them. So you can see all of the knife wounds and you can see the gash to Ellie's head. It looks to so many experts who have examined it to be more consistent with Ellie having been struck on the head rather than stabbed. Like the wound to her head is a strike, not a stab wound. And if this was the first blow, then it could explain why Ellie didn't have any defensive cuts to her hands. She may well have been rendered unconscious as soon as the attack started.
That's a lot to take in. But luckily for you, you can just rewind this as many times as you like. But it is undeniable there is a lot of evidence pointing to the fact that this is absolutely not a suicide. And as Tom Brennan says, at the very least, the wound analysis findings should be enough to change Ellie's manner of death from a suicide to at least undetermined.
Especially when you throw in the fact that Dr. Osborne's own words say that if there was no eyewitness to the door being locked, then that should be unadmissible.
And if that were to happen, it would be enough for an investigation to be reopened into the death of Ellie Greenberg. Yet, the Philadelphia authorities refuse. Why would they do that? Why would Philadelphia officials battle so hard to stop that from happening? So, with no other choice, the Greenbergs filed a second civil suit, which accuses the police, the prosecutors, and the medical examiner's office officials involved in the secret meeting of individual and willful misconduct and participating in a conspiracy to cover up the murder of their daughter.
So as the Greenbergs continued to challenge the findings, the case was passed for review from the DA's office to the Attorney General's office. But sadly, they seemed just as reluctant to take it seriously. And then in 2019, the AG's office finally finished their review and ruled again that Ellie Greenberg had indeed killed herself. Time for another plot twist?
No, I don't want any more.
No, it's so twisty. One more. A statement was released by the Attorney General's office in 2022 defending their work, because obviously there was a hell of a lot of criticism for the work that they had done. Tom Brennan came out pretty much straight away after he looked at what they had done and said the scope of what they did was completely minimal. They barely looked at it. They come out and defend it, and it says that the office under Josh Shapiro conducted what they called an exhaustive review, including new forensic analysis, and that it took over 4 years of work. Despite this, the office said that it regretted that those efforts could not bring more closure. Then they cited the appearance of a conflict of interest. And so the AG's office washed its hands of the matter and returned the case to Philadelphia. Now, what is this appearance of conflict of interest, I hear you scream? Well, for that, we need to go back to Mr. Gavin Fish. He got a tip from someone, because he has a YouTube channel, people were messaging him, and he asked people if anyone had any information to get in touch with him, and somebody did. And somebody who knew Attorney General at the time, Josh Shapiro, got in touch and told Gavin that Josh Shapiro and Uncle Jimmy, remember him? Well, Uncle Jimmy's daughter had gone to school with none other than Josh Shapiro.
Gavin went straight to eBay and found the yearbook for that school. And they did know each other.
There's pictures of them together.
Cayman Schwartzman's wife went to the same school as well, with Josh Shapiro. And are we saying that just because they knew each other, That's proof that Josh Shapiro was covering up the murder of Ellie Greenberg. Actually, we're not. We're well, whatever. It's hard to say. But it is pretty dodgy.
And he knew that he knew them. That's the thing, right? He should have recused himself the minute he knew that family, but he didn't.
And it only gets worse when you learn that the Schwartzmans and the Goldbergs have been donating to Shapiro's political campaign. And we know that thanks once again to Gavin. Gavin made all of this public. And that's when the Attorney General's office dropped the case and they handed it off to Chester County in August 2022.
It's literally only after Gavin Fish makes a YouTube video holding up the yearbook with the pictures of them together. They're like, there's an appearance of conflict of interest. We've done 4 years of work on it. We still think it's a suicide, but we're now passing it over to Chester County. It's nothing to do with us anymore.
Fuck's sake.
But if anyone listening thought that this case going over to Chester County would lead to justice, I'm sorry to say that it has not. Progress has been virtually non-existent, with barely any updates coming out publicly. And even the Greenbergs saying that for the first year that Chester County had this case, they didn't hear a single word from them. Finally, in November 2024, the Chester County DA's office stated that after a 2-year reinvestigation, they found no evidence of a crime. They released a statement saying that they were, quote, unable to move forward with criminal charges and were therefore placing the investigation into an inactive state. Now, the phraseology of the statement, I think, is pretty interesting because a lot of people were very angry when this came out, and I totally understand why. But if we really dig into it, I think what they're saying here isn't that they don't think a crime has occurred, but rather, quote, and this is what they say, we cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed. We cannot meet the burden of proof with the current evidence. But there is no statute of limitations for murder in Pennsylvania. We are not closing this case. But the reason there's no fucking evidence, if they looked into it at all, is because the police fucked up the crime scene so hard at the start. But I also have to feel like, is everything we've just talked about not enough for beyond reasonable doubt to open this case again?
Uh-huh. And it seems that they're saying that they do think it was a murder, but they can't prove it. And they can't prove it because the police on the scene that night fucked it up. We know that. And that is absolutely the fault of the lead detective who was there that night, who we don't know who that is, but we do suspect that he was influenced by the Schwartzmans.
It's too questionable for him to not have been influenced. I really do think it's this one lead detective who's influenced by the Schwartzman, says this is a suicide. Everybody else does what this lead detective says because he's the fucking lead detective. They sweep it under the rug, and then it comes back and bites them in the ass, and they spend the next 14 years covering it up.
Everybody else is trying to cover their asses for the piss-poor job that their department did, and they don't want anyone to look at them or criticise them or scrutinise them or any of those things. And the same thing goes for the medical examiner's office. They fucked it up, and they tried to stop us all from knowing.
And look, it's been passed from department to department to department, the DA's office, the AG's office, Chester County, everybody's saying, oh, well, I don't know. I really do think it's just law enforcement not wanting to throw Philadelphia Police Department rightly under the bus where they fucking belong, because it's going to reflect badly and it's going to open a whole shitstorm. But I also think they don't seem to be taking into account how much of a shitstorm this level of secrecy is leading to in terms of people calling about a conspiracy and a cover-up.
Yeah.
Now, the 2 lawsuits that the Greenbergs have brought, which we told you about, so one seeking to change the ruling on Ellie's death certificate and the other alleging a conspiracy by local officials to cover up the murder, are still active. And although they have both failed in lower courts and at appeals over the years, we do have to say that the judges who oversaw these cases and these appeals noted that the official investigation of Ellie's death was, quote, deeply flawed. With one judge at an appeal even releasing a 30-page just tirade at the medical examiner's office and the Philadelphia PD saying, we hope justice will be done one day. But sadly, their hands are tied due to the difficulty of changing a coroner's ruling. And like we told you last week, to date, the Greenbergs have spent more than $700,000 on these lawsuits and their own private investigations. But they aren't stopping anytime soon. Though Mr. Greenberg is convinced that the city is just hoping, in his own words, by procrastinating and postponing, that he'll either just die or run out of money. but he says that he and his wife will keep going, saying in a recent interview that their goal of winning justice for their daughter has given their golden years a deeper meaning, because they're both in their 70s now. Saying, "This has given us a purpose and a mission. When I think about stopping this mission, I get sick."
Whatever happens next, the Greenbergs aren't giving up. This case will be incredibly difficult to prosecute, due to how much the Philadelphia Police Department, the DA's office, and the medical examiner fucked up. Even a civil case against Sam Goldberg would be hard, if not impossible, because of the suicide ruling. And if the suicide ruling was changed, it would be unprecedented. Even though all the evidence on Ellie's body should be enough to have her death ruled as at least undetermined, especially given the fact that during their own deposition, the medical examiner's office said that they changed the manner of death verdict based on the fact that the door was locked from the inside, which it wasn't, or at least questionable, and also the lack of defensive wounds, which can be explained if Ellie was unconscious, as her head and her spinal injuries absolutely could have done.
So what about Sam Goldberg? Well, 2 years after Ellie died, he got married and now lives in New York with his wife and their 2 kids. He works as a TV producer and seems to be doing pretty well for himself. And until December 2024, so just last month, he had remained totally silent with regards to what happened to Ellie. But last month he replied to a CNN journalist who wrote a long-form article on this case. Now, of course, as the journalist says in the article, Sam Goldberg ignored all the important questions that the journalist had posed to him about the inconsistencies of the story, etc. But this is what Sam Goldberg had to say. "When Ellen took her own life, it left me bewildered. She was a wonderful and kind person who had everything to live for. When she died, a part of me died with her. Unimaginably, in the years that have passed, I have had to endure the unimaginable passing of my future wife and the pathetic and despicable attempts to desecrate my reputation and her privacy by creating a narrative that embraces lies, distortions, and falsehoods in order to avoid the truth. Mental illness is very real and has many victims. I hope and pray that you never lose someone you love, like I did, to a terrible disease, and then be accused by ignorant and misinformed people of having caused her death. If you're really writing a truthful story, dig deeper, and please do some good by raising awareness for mental health. Best, SG."
That's about as convincing as Jay-Z's statement about his rape conviction.
It's so badly written as well.
And right. Awareness around mental health. I understand. Yes, obviously, something we need to talk about. It drives me up the fucking wall when people say, it's so real, and we just have... No one is saying it's not real. Nobody is saying it's... We all know it's real.
It comes back to the point we made last week. Just because you are dealing with mental health challenges doesn't mean you can't get fucking murdered. Oh my God. It's so infuriating that he's just like, poor me, I'm the victim. The majority of that statement is about how he has been victimized by it.
Like Jay-Z.
Yes. And again, it's raise awareness for mental health.
Honestly, I fucking hate it. Raise awareness. I'll raise awareness of you being a murderer.
Yeah. And also, look, again, this might be an unfair statement, but please, Hannah, tell me if it is. Typically, I would assume, having gone through this in my own family not too long ago, when somebody kills themselves, the people that love that person look for any other alternative for what truly happened than be able to face up to the facts that it was a suicide, because that is so painful. Ellie's parents are heartbroken when they think it's a suicide. They are so, quote unquote, happy when they're told that it is a homicide by the medical examiner at first. But Sam Goldberg jumps immediately, without question, to the fact that Ellie killed herself. He's never, doesn't look for an intruder, doesn't think maybe somebody did it. He hasn't seen the CCTV. He's been gone at the gym. How does he know nobody broke in and killed her? He never, ever, ever questions that this was a straightforward suicide or that she fell on her knife. That to me is very strange.
But we don't want to finish with him because he makes me sick. We're going to end with Ellie instead. A woman who absolutely had everything to live for. Everyone who knew her loved her. She was smart, ambitious, caring, and fun, and her legacy is the love her parents have for her, even after all these years. And we've got absolutely no doubt that Joshua and Sandy Greenberg will continue to fight for justice until their final breaths. Ellie's life was worth more than Sam Goldberg's rage and the ineptitude, cowardice, and corruption of multiple law enforcement agencies and medical examiners. So like we asked you to last week, we're going to double ask you, please share this story, pile the pressure on, because it's all we can do. It's the only way that justice might be done.
Please don't go after Sam Goldberg yourself. Please don't
Leave
do
that to me.
You're not going to help the Greenbergs if you do that. The only way to put pressure on is all they're asking. All they're asking is that in light of the evidence they have collected through their private investigations and through a variety of experts that they have paid for out of their own pockets, that this be re-ruled as an undetermined death at the very least, and that a proper, impartial investigation is carried out into Ellie's death. And justice be done. They're not saying lock Sam Goldberg up.
No.
We are, but they're not. Don't you do that. Don't stoop to our level.
No, exactly.
Be better than us. And yeah, that's all they want, right? So that's it, guys. That is the finale of our series into the murder of Ellie Greenberg, because I am convinced, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Ellie Greenberg was indeed murdered.
I am too.
There you go. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opinions about this case. I am surprised that anybody thinks that she wasn't, but I know there are some of you out there, so I'll see you in the comments. I won't be commenting back because I will die. But yeah, I'm interested to see why people think it. What is it that convinces you that she did kill herself and that she wasn't killed? If you are in that camp, I would be interested to know. There you go.
So there you have it. Welcome to 2025, where everything is still terrible.
So that's it, guys. We will see you next week for... I want to say something less rage-inducing, but I don't actually know.
No, it's Brock Turner.
Oh, fuck. Why did we do this?
Okay, well, tune in next week for me to have a mental breakdown in real time.
We're going to take it in turns, Hannah. So bye, guys. We'll see you then.
Bye.
Bye.